how do students manage to master certain complex skills, such as problem solving or software coding? In my experience, I've found that a lot of students try to focus on the final answer, which might work sometimes in class because the examples are easy and their intuition can carry them. But as soon as it becomes a little more complicated, if they don't have a strong grasp of the process, then this focus on the final answer doesn't really help at all. So I've tried to look at actually the whole process of how it is that people become better at what they're doing when it comes to certain skills. And that's been studied a lot in the literature, and it turns out that a lot of skills, whether they are academic or professional, or just certain life skills, have the same structural elements in common. So let's start with a simple example that many people will be familiar with, such as learning to drive. So I learned to drive in Italy, which means I had to deal with gears. I didn't have an automatic when I learned. And so it was a very overwhelming situation for me in the beginning because my feet had to take care of the clutch and the gas and the brake. Actually, the same foot takes care of the gas and the brake, which are opposite functions. The hands are on the wheels, and then they're shifting the gears as well. The eyes need to be on the road as well as into the rear view mirror, the side mirror, the other side mirror, the dashboard back on the road. You can be distracted for too long. So there's a lot going on there. And there's so much going on, in fact, that to manage it all, I needed a checklist. So when I got in the car, I knew that the first thing that I had to do was to put my seatbelt on. And then I had to adjust my rear view mirror. And there were steps. It actually was a while before I even got to put the key in and turn the engine on. And all my attention needed to go to driving. So if somebody was sitting next to me, trying to have a conversation with me, that was upsetting. Like, shh, I need to concentrate. And as a result of just being so overwhelmed, I didn't drive well. And that's part of the process, obviously. The car was going in fits and starts. I made a lot of mistakes. The engine would stop and I needed to start it again, and so on. And I couldn't go very fast because I didn't trust myself. So that came all later. With some practice, I became to have more of a schema in my mind for how things worked when I was in the car. And I was able to listen to the feedback from my driving instructor and incorporate that and start making less mistakes and become a little better. And I had sort of a smooth way of doing it as long as it wasn't a familiar situation. But then the day that the instructor said, let's go on the highway instead of the parking lot, then I was back in overwhelmed mode. Or if a unfamiliar light would go off on the dashboard and I didn't know what that meant, I'm back panicking now. But in general, performance continues to speed up in that stage. Fast forward to now, when I've been driving for a lot of years, I drive well. I don't drive in fits and starts. The car goes smoothly and I can deal with country road as well as the highway, as well as other situations, driving in the snow maybe with the appropriate cautions. But also all my attention is not going into looking at my eyes, looking at my hands. I don't need to direct my attention to looking at the dashboard, looking at the road again. My eyes track automatically. They know what to do. And I'm not overwhelmed to the point that I can actually have a conversation with somebody who's driving next to me. I don't need both hands on the wheel. I can actually look for stations on the radio, or I can put my elbow on the window if I want to be cool. But the thing that also happened as a result of gaining expertise in driving is that if somebody came to me at this point and said, you've been driving for a long time, you can teach me, I actually would not know where to start. That list that I had, the checklist of the things that I needed to do in that order once I got in the car, that's gone in my mind. I do all those things, but I don't access that anymore. It's become automatic for me. And that is part of how we develop expertise in a skill, to the point that some people have actually talked about expertise as the movement to unconscious competence. So this model starts on the bottom left. That's where we get our students. We get them at a stage of unconscious incompetence. They come into my course. They don't want to be in my course because maybe they had 2 weeks of statistics as a module in high school and they think they know everything they need to know about statistics and they don't want to be there. And so the first step is to become conscious of their own incompetence. That stage is overwhelming. It can be an emotional stage. Maybe that's the point at which some people give up. And we'll look at some of those things in the modules about the affective domain. But if students persist through that stage, they gradually start building competence. One of my professors pointed out that between 2 and 3, that's the line where the semester ends. And there's some truth to that in the sense that you don't become an expert in 14 weeks. Obviously, you need to keep doing things over and over. But it is in that steep part of the learning curve where the more time you spend, you can actually see the returns of investment. Except your competence is very conscious at this point. People who do protocol studies of students at different stages, they say that students in stage 3, if I were to bring somebody back and sit them at a desk and give them a data analysis exercise, for instance in statistics, they have a tendency to talk themselves through the process. And they would say things like, okay, the first thing we always do in class when we have data is we plot it. So let me look at the pull-down menu for the graphs. Bar plot, pie, no, scatter plot. Okay, that's the one that we need because it's that kind of data. Okay, so then we do some exploratory data analysis. So let me get that pull-down menu. And so it's as if the working memory is so taxed that actually verbalizing those concepts out loud functions as having a little memory stick that can increase the memory capacity. Gradually, as they move on toward number 4, that becomes reincorporated back and it's now unconscious. Like when I'm driving, I don't think about necessarily all the little things that I'm doing while I'm driving. Likewise, somebody who's really competent in their field doesn't give their full attention to what they're doing in the sense that things happen automatically. So as a statistician, my natural, or second nature, I should say, my second nature inclination, because it's been rehearsed and practiced for so long now, is to look at the world in terms of variability. In any situation, I look at what's going on, why is this group behaving differently than this group. So I try to explain, I try to measure, I try to predict that variability. And I couldn't avoid doing that if I wanted to. It's become part of how I look at the world. In fact, in common language, we say, when somebody's at this stage, oh, they can do it in their sleep, basically, signaling the same idea that we're not directing all of our attentional capacities to that task because it's been very rehearsed. Now, it turns out this is a model of performance. And so the ideal stage for performance is number 4. If I had to have a procedure, medical procedure, I want to go to the surgeon who can do it in their sleep. I don't want to go to the surgeon who's competent, but who's going to cut me open and say, okay, well, the first thing we did in med school when we cut somebody open was to, so let's do that, but careful, let's not go far down to the pancreas. That wouldn't work, obviously. But that stage that is such a blessing for performance, number 4, can be sometimes a hindrance in our teaching. When we're so practiced that we're traveling at such a high altitude that we no longer see the little details that the students are struggling with. And so now you have unconsciously competent professors talking to unconsciously incompetent students, and that's two unconsciousnesses talking to each other doesn't make for very good communication and, as a result, learning. It's almost as if you want to transcend to stage 5, where you retain all your consciousness, but you reach back into stages 3 and 2, remembering how hard it was when you were learning it the first time. Which parts were hard exactly, and how were they hard? Did this piece take more time? Did this piece take more practice? Did this piece was just conceptually harder? Was it counterintuitive? You thought it was going to be this way, it actually ended up being the opposite. And when you can signal all those things to the students to help them build their competence that way. So the idea is that as experts, part of being an expert means building an expert blind spot. There's no way to get rid of that blind spot. And in fact, it's something that helps you function at high levels. But you want to be on the lookout for that in teaching situations. That is also why in some studies, some students report that they prefer their graduate students to their instructors, because graduate students are not all the way there in terms of their trajectory to expertise. And so they have a much easier time reaching back and coaching the students on the little step and giving them all those little instructional cues that they need. And so back to the car example, you can see how that story maps onto some of the stages. So what's important there? It's important that the driver, it's important that I had a lot of opportunities to practice, and I received a lot of feedback from the instructor. So much so that some researchers in the field say that it is not teaching that causes learning, but it's actually the learners themselves who cause their own learning when they attempt to perform, depending on the quality of feedback and depending on the opportunities they have to incorporate that feedback into further practice. Now, an interesting feature of that is that a car is a dangerous element. You could kill people, you could kill yourself if you do it wrong. So it really helps that cars in driving school have dual controls. So the instructor can take over if you're doing something really wrong. And so that creates a safe space for the learner to practice and to attempt new things. And so that's something, that's a similar thing that we're trying to recreate in our courses, creating safe opportunities for students to practice so that we can give them the best feedback that we can about their learning. What is the best feedback? Well, it's about finding out what the students are and then targeting the next level where they can go to. But first you need to know where they are. And so the thing about learning is that we don't get to see it. Learning happens in the brain. Learning is a biological process about rewiring our neural connections in the brain. So we can only see how students are learning by looking at what they do. The picture on the screen is an X-ray of a laptop. You can only see what's inside the laptop if you develop tools that will allow you to do that, whether it's an X-ray or whether it's a screwdriver, and then you can take it apart and put it back together. Similarly, if we are trying to do the same thing, reveal the learning so that we can target the feedback to get to the next stage, we are going to need tools that allow us to surface where the student is at, what stage of expertise they are, so that we can build them to the next stage.